What makes someone a balanced leader? Hey there, this is your friend and guide, Caroline. On today's Balanced Leader, my incredible guest and I share strategies to help you lead with confidence, stay resilient, and avoid burnout. This isn't just about leadership, it's about thriving holistically, in mind, body, and spirit. Ready to recalibrate? Well, let's dive in and create the balanced life you deserve. Welcome to this edition of today's Balanced Leader. As always, I have a question for you. And I want you to think about this. What no one tells you about leadership in 2025 is this. It's not just about your productivity or your KPIs anymore. It's about carrying the emotional weight of your team while still trying to hold on to yourself. We're leading now through people that have got grief, burnout, change, fatigue, and quiet quitting, all while navigating our silent battles. So if you have ever asked, how do I keep showing up when everything feels like too much? This conversation is for you. Today I'm joined by two remarkable guests, a husband and wife team, who blend business strategy with deep emotional intelligence, helping leaders like you lead with more clarity, capacity, and compassion. We've got Melissa and Kevin Thallemer. She's an executive and HR leader with over 20 years of experience supporting teams and individuals through emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and leadership development. With a background in counseling, business, and systems coaching, she integrates clinical insights and strategic expertise to drive powerful transformation. And then we've got Kevin Thallemer, who brings over 20 years of business, mental health, and coaching. As a board-certified counselor, he blends his background in multinational organizations with clinical expertise to help leaders navigate those complex emotions, build those healthy cultures, and lead with depth and impact. A veteran and hypnosis practitioner, Kevin helps leaders navigate complex emotional terrain, develop team potential, and lead with clarity and heart. Welcome, Melissa and Kevin.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so excited. I know we've had a little chat ahead of time. So like I said, we're just going to get right into some of the questions because I feel like we've got so much and we may run out of time. But let's start with, if we zoom out and look at the workplace today with fresh eyes, because there's been so much going on, what's the deeper shift happening beneath the surface in 2025? And then within that, what's calling leaders to evolve most urgently, and how can they rise to meet that call with both strength and grace?
There's a lot there, Carolyn. When we looked at what is 2025 calling for, big things we're seeing is heavy focus on human-centered leadership. How are leaders going to start to manage through these emotions? We see a lot of stress. We hear about it, right? We've got this massive shift from 2021 and 2022, which was the Great Resignation. And now it is, as you mentioned, the quiet quitting, or people who are just unhappy, sometimes miserable, burnout. We've got layoffs. And so we're seeing this heavy shift in certainly they're calling for mental health support. And we feel like companies are actually doing what they can and leaders are doing what they can, but they might not necessarily be equipped or have the time or even the resource to be able to support that. So, I guess the biggest issue we might look at might be, how does that human-centered leadership start to help to support our teams, leaders' teams in stress management and reducing burnout so they can perform. The leaders have their own stress as well.
I think that we've been talking about and hearing over the last 10, 15 years, right, around needing emotional intelligence and leadership and needing the soft skills and needing all those things and being able to move through changes. So we've been hearing this for years and years and years. And I think now is, especially with AI and all of the different things that are happening in our world, to me, this is the moment that we've been hearing about is actually happening in today's environment. And Kevin and I talk about it. It almost feels like we're in this pressure cooker. We visualize it as this pressure cooker. We have, all these things happening with governments and different changes and the wars and this economy, all these different things, prices of things, and all these pressures are coming in. And in the middle of it is the individual, it's the employee, it's the leader that are in the workforce, and they're having to manage all of these inputs more so than in, I think, any other period of time. It's almost like the industrialized revolution again, but in this AI frame. And it is that it's that as a leader having to really navigate it with that emotional intelligence, because the workplace is so complex, because now it's not just work that's coming in, which it never really was in reality, right? But it's all of that other stressors coming in. So you have employees coming in overwhelmed and stressed because of all of these pieces coming at them. And I think the human-centered leadership is really about how do you meet that person where they're at, accounting for not only who they are as the person that works in the environment, but the whole person. Because you can't just look at them as the working person, but like your whole employee as a holistic view. So we're really seeing that as a huge need, because I think stress has just been on the rise and people are needing more support, and they are looking to their employers for that.
And anxiety. Yeah. So, thinking about that, and I'm a big proponent of emotional intelligence as well. Like I feel like people are being asked to do more with less. So we've got less people potentially that we've got running a business, yet the expectation has increased because of everything that's going on. We'll get into the having to pause to be able to reset a lot of times. But when we talk about emotional intelligence and evolving leaders, because now they're being asked to guide, not just perform. You talked a little bit about it. And they're getting involved in people's emotional well-being. We talked about the fact that, there's hybrid, there's remote, which makes it even tougher sometimes. We're becoming very diverse, and often teams feel completely depleted. How would you say, if I was a leader saying, I love emotional intelligence, I just don't know how to bring it into my day to be able to support not only myself, but my team as well?
I think it can be difficult. What time do we have, right? I mean, and we understand it. The last thing we certainly ever try to do with our clients is to say, okay, we're going to give you more to work on, right? But there is small steps that they can take. And no one says that they have to be coaches, that they have to be counselors, they have to be psychiatrists, they have to be great at psychology. But if you're able to just kind of slow down and give your team the psychological safety that they might require to be able to say, hey, Kevin, I'm really having a hard time with this today. I'm really feeling stressed. I'm really feeling burnout, or I feel like this deadline's too tight, or I feel like I'm overwhelmed. That's a great conversation that they're even having, that they're even just able to say what they're feeling. The leader needs to kind of have that space for them in a sense. And that's probably the biggest thing. And I realize it's difficult with so many conflicting priorities and calendars and meetings and things of that nature. If we're able to just get them to slow down and be able, when they're talking to their team, and have that psychological safety, to me, that awareness is the emotional intelligence they need. They can read books all day, but if they're not able to implement that with their team, when priorities, when there's so much stress, or when there's so many conflicting priorities, that's the time that probably is the best time to incorporate that.
And it's also not thinking about it as like a separate thing, right? So it's how do you bring that into who you are and how you show up in the world every day, versus I have this separate task. Because the moment that you think of it as separate than yourself, the moment it becomes another to do, versus what do I need as an individual to be my best self in my everyday. And for me, it might be, my workout in the morning and meditation. For Kevin, it might be something different, but how I start my day sets the tone than how I show up. And just something as simple as just checking in with yourself periodically throughout the day, and just checking in with where are you at? Because if you are feeling overwhelmed and stressed, that's going to impact the tone of all the conversations that you have. So if even just starting somewhere is just checking in with yourself and seeing where you're at. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, maybe you need just a break and taking a few breaths, or, just going outside for a second, but not necessarily looking at it as a separate thing. But how do you incorporate just a moment to check in with yourself, a moment to pause, a moment to see where your team is at? It doesn't have to be something big and grandiose. It can be something as simple as like creating the space for yourself and for your team.
It's funny you say that. I just did a post on LinkedIn about that. Sorry. And, what comes to mind as you're talking, and I love that you say it's not a separate thing. There's a couple of things that popped up while you were saying that. I've got a t-shirt that says humankind be both. I think that's the piece, right? It's not always like we said about the KPIs and hitting those numbers and making labor work and those types of things, because when we ignore the emotional health of our people and ourselves, there are silent costs attributed to that, right? So you both have deep clinical backgrounds. I'd love to hear, how do you see therapy informed skills shaping the future of leadership?
I think it is the awareness is the biggest thing, right? I mean, it's how we're not even how you're showing up with your team, and KPIs are still all very, very important. And how do we use our counseling skills or even just our insight into cognitive behavior therapy to say, how am I showing up? Because if I'm showing up frantic or rushed or angry or annoyed, my team sees that. Your team sees it. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So, really when we incorporate that, whether it is a multimodality approach, it might very well be a mindful or a quick breath work, or even just having a couple mindful breaths. So if you are completely stressed and overwhelmed, you can show up for your team, because all these old messages that are coming in your head, I have to make this decision, or someone's not going to like this decision. Leadership is very, very difficult. And when we're dealing with all these old messages about how I should behave, how I have to behave, I think that's really where our focus is getting them, yes, they're high achievers, they're top performers, they're smart, they've read all the books, they know all the leadership stuff. But when noise comes in, when their own stress is there, and their fear of maybe how they're going to be perceived, or their fear of making a decision comes in, that's where we have to get them away from that, to say, okay, where does that clarity come in? What happens if I'm not liked? What happens if this is the wrong decision? We want to slow them down a little bit too as well. And like I said, that can come through cognitive, it come through like more of a psychology approach. But we also want to make sure that they're grounded and say, okay, if this mistake happens, it's not terrible, it's not awful. So they don't freeze. So they don't, so they don't are slow to make a decision. So they're not overreacting when they're dealing with their clients too.
And I think it's not, I don't think there's any ever an expectation for someone to be the therapist as a leader, right? But it's being informed around like how is it that stress can impact us, and just being aware of the different stages of stress. Because if you have a team that's coming into a meeting from multiple other meetings, and maybe they're in a fight or flight response, being able to just assess that really quickly. And if you note that, then not just running right into a meeting, because if you just go into the topic of the meeting and don't take that pause to see where everyone's at, you're not going to bring everyone along with you, and they're not going to be as present and engaged, and the output of that meeting is not going to be productive. But if you can quickly assess, oh, wow, my team is in fight or flight, they're seeming overwhelmed, maybe I just start the meeting with a few minutes of breath work. So everyone just can clear and start fresh, and everyone comes with a clear perspective as they start the meeting. So it doesn't, again, have to be huge things, but just having that in the back of your mind around like, how is your team showing up in this moment, and not having an exact science behind it, but okay, I'm seeing the nonverbals, the verbals, the energy of the room is showing me that my team's not in the best place. Okay, how do I either welcome the conversation because I have time to explore what that is, or do something to help shift them to be more present in the moment? Because when someone's present, they're going to be able to come up with better solutions and decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. And it makes me think about a workshop that I recently ran for a business. And it was not just leaders, it was anybody who wanted to come. They were very sales oriented. And I think even just recognizing that, one size does not fit all. So you're going to have to learn the nuances, if you don't already know the differences of your people. I think breath work works for anybody, but your breath work might be different than my breath work, right? So I think it's also really exploring and being open to exploring and asking. I always remember people asking, how are you? And then they're doing it as they're walking by. I think like making it purposeful, doing things with
Mhm.
intention, right? So making sure there's
100%.
intentionality behind it to ensure that your team feels supported, and it's not just off the cuff as you're running into a meeting. I mean, we can do, hey, I'm just checking in, how are you doing? running to a meeting, I can come back and connect with you. But that relationship building almost seems to need some revamping and fixing in a lot of situations to be able to have those times where you can identify when somebody is struggling with something to be able to help them. Yeah.
Yeah, or the whole team. Yeah, I mean that very well. And again, it doesn't have to be breath work. It can be
It could
just
be,
checking in, just to slow down and be like, "Hey, I'm going to take a deep breath with you because I'm coming from this horrible meeting." But that's the worst thing you can do. But when we get so caught up in these priorities and these things that have to get done and meeting benchmarks and hitting these goals, yeah, we can tend to forget. Leaders tend to forget, and it's completely understandable when our calendar's filled. But that's where it's just, okay, there is that responsibility to the team, and that may just be, what are we hearing out here? Here's what I'm feeling. And maybe even showing a little bit of vulnerability too as well, and be like,
yeah.
feeling really overwhelmed. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's creating that space for them to say, yeah, I am too. This is crazy. You don't want to turn into a complaint fest, and we understand that, but it can just be like, this is crazy. I'm with you. I'm worried we're going to hit it. I'm feeling concerned too as well. Showing that vulnerability is a great way to do it too as well.
Yeah, I feel like that community word comes into play, right? Where
Mhm.
we don't have to do it alone. We can do it together and support each other. Sometimes just being heard is all you need, and then you can move on, right?
Right.
Right.
So,
Right.
so let me ask you, there's a difference between team building, or the way team building used to be, and truly transforming group dynamics, especially for leaders that are navigating through all these things that we're talking about. Particularly stretched thin teams comes to mind. You know, what's one shift you think that they could make to build deeper resilience and trust beyond that surface level team building? And we talked a little bit about it, but what have you seen recently that works as opposed to using that team building the word?
I think creating that time and space, and I think people sometimes think of team building as it's an event. We're going to go, build something, and then we're going to be a team. But I think it's really having some basic conversations around, like, how do we want to communicate as a team? What does that look like? What does it look like when we're in conflict? How do we best communicate and receive information when we're in conflict? So we call it like team alignment. And how do you create that team alignment of, like, how do we want to communicate? What methods do we want to use to communicate? How do we want to have conflict? How do we want to meet, and how frequently? Because just having transparency about some of those pieces and getting alignment as a team of what that looks like can start to create the trust, because then you're all coming from the same perspective, and you also know where everyone else is coming from. So I might then understand that maybe Kevin's way of meeting or communicating is maybe not my way, especially when you think about multi-generations within the workforce right now. It's understanding that I might not personalize it when he's sending me an email and I really invest with like a quick message. Or if we have conflict, I know he might need time and space to process it, and I just want to go right at it. I might pause before doing that because now I know how he works best with conflict. But to me, it's creating that time and space just to have conversations and basic conversations around how do we want to function as a team. And it doesn't have to be complex. It literally can just be that conversation with certain key questions to ask and talk about and align as a team.
May take some time,
Yeah.
but at what expense do you not have that time to spend, right? And I think there's the other thing. And so when we look at group development, certainly when maybe we're coaching at a group level, we want to figure out where they're at. Are they performing? Are they storming still? And oftentimes we got to get them back to square one. And that's what Melissa's referring to is, let's take the step back to say, okay, we formed quick. We never really normed, which is essentially what Melissa's saying, is like, how do we want to communicate? And now what do we do? Sometimes we got to take a step back and be like, okay, let's put everything on the table. How do we want to deal with conflict? We have conflict. How do we, this infighting, these things like that nature. So it may take an hour meeting to do it, but at what cost are you not doing it? And that's really what we tell clients a lot of times is, okay, yeah, you're losing productivity. You got people backstabbing. You have someone trying to take, there's always going to be someone who wants to be the leader, and there's derailment, there's, infighting. I mean, there's a million of these terms, but like, you really want to kind of level set those expectations, and that gets them back into what we can consider norming, to hopefully move them into getting to where they're actually a performing group.
Yeah, and I love that what you said, Kevin, about actually, if so a lot of times people are there, right? I've got an hour, I've got a training to do. Everybody show up in the room. and then you realize there's something going on. So instead of just pushing through, actually hitting that pause button, which to me shows you at a strategic level, at a compassionate level, at that adaptive leadership where you can kind of go, okay, you know what? We're not doing this training today. We have this to work on. Because there's, and I'd love to hear from you, from your experience, when we think about working with different leaders and identifying something like that, there's internal shifts that have to happen that make the greatest external impact. Have you seen anything in particular in the internal shifts when you're working with a group of individuals that seems to work best or really help them to quickly move through it? Because I think sometimes if leaders can identify it and take a, so what I'm looking for is if I was a leader and I experienced that, what's one or two things that I could do out of the gate once I've stopped them to make that internal shift so that we can proceed? Like, what do you recommend?
You mean like techniques, like what a leader can implement if their team is
Yeah,
not necessarily operating ideally?
correct. Yeah. So I've now identified it, I've stopped them. What would be your next step that you would guide somebody to say, well, try this before you call us and we come in and do a program? Or
I think I'm always an advocate of calling out the elephant in the room, just because I think it's unhealthy when we pretend there is no elephant, but we all can sense the elephant.
right.
So I think the calling it out is the first step, as you said. And then I think if you're going to take it to the next level and try to air out and discover and explore it, is first creating the framework of what creates that environment where people can openly speak freely. So again, going back to that team alignment around like what are the parameters of safety? So creating some kind of ground rules, so to speak, to have the conversation so that at least everyone's coming from the same framework, and then encouraging and asking open-ended questions, and then making sure as the leader that you're kind of creating the environment so that people can have conversations, so that, meaning like you're not responding in a reactive way, you're really being mindful of your own responses, your own reactions. And then also you're encouraging. So as people are sharing, you're encouraging and recognizing them. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then trying to keep that conversation going. So once everyone can try to air out all the things without judgment, kind of creating the space of like, let's just get it all on the table without judgment, then almost looking at it and saying, okay, as a team, how do we want to tackle this? And having the team is always going to have the answer. The team has the intelligence, not, when we even go into help people, it's more about facilitating the space for them to come up with their answers, but creating that space for the team to say, okay, here's all the concerns we just said without judgment. This is just what it is. How do we want to go about approaching it? How do we want to prioritize that? And what are some solutions that we think would help these things? Because then not only are you airing everything and everyone feels validated because they were able to get it out, but then you're having the team come up with the solutions to solve for that, which then they will also have the buy-in, obviously, to then execute that.
The other thing I would suggest too is the leader can model it.
Mm-hmm.
The leader can just here's an example of what this might look like, and here's what the leader's seeing, and I'm feeling like maybe I'm not doing my best, or I feel, using I statements would be the big thing, is just, I'm seeing this or I'm feeling this and I'm wondering if anyone else, and the leader's going to have to be the facilitator at that point too, especially as you're airing of grievances. There might be something where to say, okay, this is not an attack. I think we just want to talk about it, but it's like, thanks for sharing. It's really hearing what they're saying. I'm hearing you say what I think based on that. And so you may have to, what we call blocking people, because people may come in and be like, well, that was actually your fault. And be like, well, that's not really, you want to kind of slow that down a little bit and just really model that behavior to say, okay, it's okay to speak up. It's okay to be vulnerable. And it's okay to say this because, again, there's no consequences. And this is all normal part of our development. And this is what we need. We all want to be here. I mean, we're all here for a reason, right? And so we want this group to perform. We want them to get to that next level of development. So this becomes easier. We have less meetings. We're more productive meetings. Everyone kind of wants the same thing. And it's just, they need that space to be able to do it. And so if you were able to try, whether that's modeling or giving that space, the results are usually pretty quick.
Yeah, and I love that, assuming positive intent and not making any judgment, right? It's almost like when you've got a broken culture and you need to go in, you're gathering data, right? As the leader, you're there to gather the data, whether their perception is right or wrong. It's how they feel.
Exactly.
And we know humans tend to go, what if negative as opposed to what if positive? So, how do we help them get there? And that's why I often talk to leaders, and I'm sure you guys do in your workshops, about if you start to hear something, you need to address it, because otherwise, that water cooler conversation is going to happen, and it's going to be even more work for you to unravel that, because now they've formulated their own opinions, and a lot of times a bunch of them will agree with it. Where if you can get their buy-in by bringing them along, that is what a leader truly needs to do, is to be there for the team and make sure that they're getting the support and the answers they need. You may not be able to give them all the answers, but at least enough to have them understand what the intent is. And sometimes you're just going to have to say, to your point, Kevin, you know what? I agree. I don't, I think this is a lot of work, or I don't disagree with the process that's happening, but our end goal is all aligned, because we all want to make money. We all want to have jobs. We all want to make our businesses better. It's a business, right? At the end of the day.
At the end of the day.
At the end of the day. Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever experienced, and I'd love to hear this, because I'm hearing a little bit more grumble around the managing up portion. So especially now where it feels, I think, more than ever like a push down in what's being asked, to be able to push back, to be able to manage up when they're trying to protect themselves and their teams, right? So how can leaders advocate for themselves and their teams when the asks are too much, but yet still maintain that respect, trust, and influence? What have you experienced there or taught there?
You
I think it's being honest. I always think it's being honest and also framing it in as much as you can. So if you're the leader trying to prepare for that conversation, first I would probably try to outline all the concerns that you have. So putting it down on a list or typing it out, whatever method that someone has, and then going back through and just kind of checking yourself, which are words that are more emotional and which are words are more like objective and neutral, they're more like factually based. Because a lot of times it's just even processing for yourself, like what am I trying to share? So trying to organize that. So once you have kind of your view of like, here's my objective, neutral concerns, then coming to the table with, here's my concerns, but here are some suggestions or solutions that I think I can solve it. Because a leader, ideally, the leader's leader will want to hear and solve for the problem, but it also is helpful when the person comes kind of, again, not from that emotional place, but kind of neutral. Here are the facts of what I'm seeing and why I'm seeing it. And here are some things that I think can solve it. Because then it at least gives the leader a starting point to say, okay, how can we solve it? And you're not just coming with like the problem.
Yep.
I like that. Kevin, did you want to add? Sorry, I didn't want to cut you
I mean,
off.
I think it's important. You've got to advocate for your team, but I really feel that, yeah, that is where Melissa's favorite quote is, be the change you want to see, right? Never, and this goes for leaders too as well. Don't just come in with a bunch of complaints and be like, my team's overloaded, we can't do it. Sorry, that's not the job. Yeah, we've got to figure this out. How do we work together? And again, saying the same thing, vulnerable. I'm worried about my team. I feel like we're overwhelmed. Here's some things I think we can do. Can we deprioritize? Can we reschedule? You've got to come in with that. But no one's got time to be going around with here's the emotion and everything like that. And now new complaints coming on. It's, you can still show vulnerability and be like, okay, here are the things that I think we need to do or what we need to do, prioritize. Here's my recommendation to protect my team, to protect my business, to protect you, because you've got your own KPI. This was still probably delegated to you as well.
And I think reiterating, as you said, is like everyone typically wants the same thing.
Yep.
And starting from that place, because I think sometimes when we start from like, there's these two different places, it can start the conversation off by feeling like you're coming from two different places, but versus like, we all want the same thing. So starting from I also want to achieve whatever the thing is, but I'm having concerns and here's why, and then giving your explanation. But starting from the common framework usually at least sets the tone of a collaborative solution.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the approach of gather all the information from your team, remove the emotional piece, and come at it from a business sense, from a bird's eye view, is what I always say, because that's what leaders need to do with the common goal or objective in mind. So those were great. So thank you. That's helped, because I think a lot of people struggle with, how
They
do I
do.
manage up? How
Yeah.
do I say
Right.
no? How do I say potentially that, you know what, another department isn't meeting the racing model, right? They're not being accountable for what they're supposed to be doing. And so it's coming back on my team and I. What does that look like, and how do those conversations happen to make sure that you're now not just taking more on? Because I always say, be careful what you ask for, because if you start to take it on,
That's
you may
true.
end up owning it long term, right? So
Right.
yeah.
Right.
And remember, and just kind of as we close that one out, remember the leader and your skip leader have their own priorities, and we don't understand all the time. And so coming with even your own empathy, even going to your next level up, coming with just a little bit of empathy and understanding goes a long way too as well, because you're not coming in going, my team's so this, my team's so that, we're overloaded, we can't handle it, you're doing too much, what are you promising? And remember, those are directives from elsewhere too as well. And there's a million solutions there, but without that emotion, or just even with coming with your own empathy and be like, do you help me understand? It's a
And
great term. One of my
it all
favorites.
goes back to taking that moment to pause and catch your breath, right? It's remove that
Hmm.
emotional piece with anything you do and look at it from the business lens.
Yep,
Even in your own personal lives, right? You want
absolutely.
to
Right.
be objective and not allow the silly of the negative emotions that are coming in, that are playing in your brain, the little ego, whatever you want to call it, and actually dealing with what the core concern is, what the core objective is, and the challenges you have, right?
Right.
I'm sorry, I want to
Oh,
cut you
no,
off.
go ahead.
Okay, sorry. We say all the time, like, your mind's not your friend. Be real careful of your mind. Your mind's running in the background. It's not always your friend. If it's running in the background, and you had a problem with Susan before, you felt you were getting too much, you never said it, that's still coming to you. And it's going, Susan overloaded you before and she didn't care. And then if that's what our belief is, that's not fair to Susan, and it's not going to help us.
Right. And then if you have, I always use if I'm coming with a very strong emotion, that to me is my signal internally to pause. Like if I'm feeling something charged very strongly, that's my signal. Like that's all I need is to be like, okay, don't react in this moment. Just stop for a second, even if it's a few seconds, because I need to just check in with myself before anything else comes out of my mouth to make sure I'm not coming with some old stuff into the conversation.
Yeah, watch
Yeah.
those tricks. Yeah.
And so when Susan sends me that email, I'm not yeah, I don't have this preconceived thought of what she's meaning to say, when in fact that's not what it is. We're our
Right.
own worst enemy sometimes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that, to your point, professionally and personally, that these same things happen to us personally too. So that's why, yeah, you can't disconnect them too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Relationship is relationship. It doesn't matter, right? So
Exactly.
let's shift a little bit to, because I know you work on systems as well, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about that. So my question's more around, from a systems lens, what are the deeper patterns or structures within organizations that you see kind of needing to shift in order to create that real lasting cultural change? And then my caveat to that is, as a leader, where do I even begin if I want to be a catalyst for that change?
To me, you mentioned it earlier. A lot of it is doing things consciously or with intention. I think when we just allow things to just kind of be and not necessarily consciously think about the environment, the cultures that we're creating, how we want to show up, how do we want to embody the values of the organization? What does that look like? And doing that from a place of intention and kind of really being mindful of how that looks as a leader, as an employee, then I think that's when things just kind of take their own course and it becomes whatever it is. I think when a leader takes a very conscious, intentional point of how they want to show up as a leader, how they want their leadership team to communicate, or the environment that they want to have, and creating that vision with their team and then modeling it, then I think that's when you're creating the vision for the system and then the behaviors that support that. And then the coaching has kind of come along with that, the feedback that's given marry with that. And ultimately, then you're creating the environment that the system is clear what their vision is, and everyone knows kind of how to align and see whether that even aligns with their own personal, that's when people can self-select. That's not the vision I want to be in, but that also attracts who wants to be in a workplace like that because it's very clear. I think it's when people don't, or leaders don't do it necessarily with intention. It's just kind of like we're in an environment and we're focused on the work part. That's when the culture kind of takes its own form. And then things end up showing up and cultures kind of almost create more out of whatever behaviors that are happening versus with intentional choices.
Yeah, good answer.
Yeah, I like that. I really like that. We talked a little bit before we hit record about resilience. What do you share with me? Because resilience can mean so many things, but what does real resilience look like for leaders that are navigating these long-term anxiety, stress, uncertainty, grief? And how do they rebuild themselves while still holding space for others?
Oh, yes. So,
I think,
yeah, go ahead.
I think,
Huge question.
I
Yeah.
think resilience to me is not necessarily that you're not going to have all of the challenges and you're going to have stress. You're going to have things, again, personally or work-wise, right? You're going to have things that show up in your life. That's just life, work and personal. But it's really about having the tools and techniques and the support system that you can recognize when you're in a place where you need additional support to help you through that. So I think it's really about having those tools and techniques.
Yeah, I mean, resilience, I know it's kind of definitely like a buzzword right now, but how do you deal with the change? Change is going to happen, stress is going to happen, your team's going to there's always going to be overwhelm, stress. Nothing's ever going to act exactly how you want it to act. The world doesn't owe us that, right? And we can't pretend that we can always be perfect, but showing that resilience is to say that, yeah, I'm okay being less than perfect. My team's okay being less than perfect. I'm doing everything I can, but how do I help guide them, or how do I navigate through that too as well?
So we do have
Empowered resilience, of course, yeah.
Do you want to explain?
Go ahead.
So we have an empowered resilience free webinar that we can share where we're really giving kind of the guidelines around the different pieces and different points that we all go through within the change curve. We all experience ups and downs as part of change, and it's also not linear. It's a journey, it's a path. You can regress, you can go forward, you can go up and down. But we have a training basically to share what does that look like, not only for yourself, but then for others. And then we offer tools and techniques to help you through those harder moments. Sometimes it's just normalizing that fact that we all have ups and downs and we all have those challenges, but different practices and tools and techniques can help us through those more challenging moments.
Yeah, I think the big thing is understanding, is normalizing it, that we revert, and it's gonna look like stages of grief, but it's what it is. I mean, that's actually what it is. So, and you revert back, and that doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. I think there's a lot that very few journeys are linear. Very few journeys are easy. All of the things that we talk about, whether it is cognitive, it's listening to those messages, it's pausing and reframing these old messages so we can come lead with clarity. This is hard. This is very difficult. It takes a lot of work and a lot of practice. And that's really where, our resilience freebie in the webinar that we created is just to say, okay, whether you're leading a team or you're leading change, or it's a digital transformation, or it's a business initiative, or there's just overall personal change. Yeah, give yourself a little bit of grace and peace as you kind of go back and forth a little bit, and just give you tips and tools on how to see this change. It really just with more patience for yourself is probably the big thing.
Yeah, and I talk a lot about that with my clients that are in one-on-one and group, where I've often said we know this, we're harder on ourselves than we are on our friends, on our partners, right? And one of the tips that I've had is I've guided somebody to actually look at themselves in the mirror, look at their eyes, not right, just deep into their eyes, and have that conversation. Because the empathy and compassion you'll end up having for yourself is so huge that you start to realize that you are just being too hard on yourself, and to actually give yourself compassion. This is a journey. We are going to have setbacks. We are going to learn from things. But I also look at it as, okay, well, I misstepped there. I'm not going to make that mistake again, or I'm going to make a different one in a different way, right? But I've learned something, and I love that about not being linear. And I will add the link and the freebie that they're talking about in the show notes, because it's powerful to help you navigate through that. Because sometimes when you're on your own and you don't have somebody to talk to, so if you work in a large business, sometimes you've got colleagues that you can reach out to. But when you're in a small company of 5, 10, 15 people, Melissa, you've been in HR, you know, sometimes you're the only HR person, and who do you go to talk to? And that's why I say having a network is key, so that you can phone a friend. But when you don't have that, this is a tool that can actually help you reframe how you're thinking, or even just support you in the next steps that you have to take.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so let me ask you this. I'd like to give some tangibles and actions. So for the leader listening right now who's tired but still wants to grow, what's one small but powerful step that they can take this week to lead with more intention and emotional clarity? What would you guide them with? Putting you on the spot.
Self-care.
Self-care. Yeah.
Might be self-care. It's, I just keep taking from your toolkit, but Melissa says it a lot, and when we've put it into like just our seminars, like think about like the airplane, like when they're saying put on your oxygen mask first before you put on the mask of someone else who can't put it on. It is important to work on yourself. It's important to find the time to do it, and self-care can be anything, right? It doesn't have to be exercise and eating well. I mean, if those things are important to you, but is that time for yourself where you can just say, okay, even just starting to work on your self-care, like what are a few things I want to do to really help me this week and come with clarity. And I am stressed. I'm maybe miserable at my job, or I'm worried about my job, or I'm worried about my team. And just what's one thing I can do to kind of make sure that I'm there for them? Because if I'm showing up with this anxiety and this level of worry and this personal or lack of sleep or whatever it is, or just not being my best self, yeah, and unfortunately, that's going to show up in the team, and it's difficult. It's tough to carve out time for yourself, but I mean, maybe that would be the best,
And it doesn't have to be complex. It could look like I'm giving myself 5 minutes,
Yeah.
5 minutes to do whatever. I'm giving myself 2 minutes. So, I mean, I get that some of us have really challenging schedules, and it's hard to even find the time for those things, but it doesn't have to be a massive amount of time. Even just carving out, I'm going to always give myself 5 minutes a day to go for a walk outside. I don't know, whatever it is. But then committing to yourself and giving yourself that space. And then maybe as you do that, then you can give yourself a little bit more time and see how that works. And also reflect on how did you then show up after you gave yourself that time? So not just doing it, but then reflecting at the end of the day when like, what did my day then look like? Because oftentimes with our clients is when they start building in self-care practices, they start realizing how they show up in their day, how they can show up for their family, how they can show up for their leader, from their teams, from their their leaders is from a very different place than when they just push through and hustle through.
Yes, absolutely agree with that. I actually have talked a lot on, and I love the airplane one. I use it often. People that I used to work with will giggle when they listen to this, because I used to say it to them all the time, because they would try and skip lunch. And I was like, nope, put the mask on yourself first. You can't help anybody else. Let me ask you, because I know I have non-negotiables every morning. You talked a little bit about pausing, reflecting, and then the reflection at the end of the day, which is my wrap up at the end. But share with me, what are your guys' non-negotiables? What is something that you do every day for self-care for yourselves?
it's probably better your question, because my self-care practices are not as great as Melissa's, but
I have non-negotiables. I wake up very early for myself. I have to get some movement in, and it doesn't have to be crazy exercise, but I need to get movement in. For me, I do meditation and breath work, but I purposely wake up earlier so that I can move my day around that. And then at the end of the day, I like to be right before I go to sleep, like I'm in my bed, about to close, like I close my eyes. I reflect on my day. I reflect on what went well, my gratitude. I do at least 5 things that I'm grateful for. Oftentimes it's way more than that. And then I think about like, what did I learn? What do I want to apply on my next day? And that's usually like how I end every day, is with that thought. And then when I wake up in the morning, try not to get on the phone right away, but then do my practices and then kind of be intentional of how do I want then my day to look as I'm going through my routine in the meditation and breath work in the morning.
I love that. And Kevin's non-negotiables are to be around
get right
you.
to work.
No,
Yeah.
no, to be around Melissa.
Yeah, it helps a lot. Yeah, right. So that's, yeah,
She'll
she's
tell me
got it
what
for
to
both
do.
of us. That's a great routine. So I feel like that's enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
for the company. Yeah. So yeah, I really, and it's hard. It is hard for me to do it. And so that's, but like, and I think as your listeners are saying, it's okay, right? I mean, there are certain things I'd love to work out, but there are a lot of times where I'm like, I'm going to go work out, but I'm like, or I'm going to get right to work. And I know
Yeah.
that's not good for me either, but I try to carve out what I can. But even if it is a walk, even if it is just enjoying the outside for just a minute, like where it's not, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. That's even that for me can be a real powerful thing where I'm just like, okay, I just enjoy some sun. I hear a bird. I see that plant. The grass looks so green. It's a beautiful day out here, and I'm not thinking about work. And yeah, some days more than others. But even that does help to just kind of ground you a little bit and just be like, okay, yeah, I mean, because again, we're constantly got social media or music or work, and then all the other thoughts in our head. Those can just be so overwhelming and if we're not recognizing those or taking time just to slow them down a little bit, sometimes we can get wrapped up in them real quick.
Yes. And I think you said it at the beginning was giving yourself grace on the days that you can't, right? So, there's people that travel a lot, whether it be by car, by plane, and I always say to them, you know what? Your breath work may be while you go and pee in the bathroom and washing your hands. Like that may be the only time you have. Maybe you're getting steps in while I used to joke about how when I go to the mall, I love to people watch with my dad when I was younger. And I was like, for me, that was the form of relaxation because your
Mhm.
mind shifted its focus. And that's
Yep.
really what it's about, right? It's just turning off the noise that is and just allowing yourself to breathe. So I love that. Yeah, my non-negotiables are in the morning when I wake up, my feet do not hit the ground until I've scanned my body. If I feel anything, I breathe into it, I release it, I give it love, I set an intention for what I want for the day. And sometimes I'll do a meditation if I have time. If I don't, I just do a quick breathe it like 3 breaths in, hold it, release, and then feet hit the ground. And then to your point at the end of the day, gratitude. I do find that some people struggle with gratitude because they're like, I had a horrible day. There's nothing to be grateful for. What do you tell them, Melissa? What are some of the things? Because I know I've given them some, but
When our children were younger, we used to do at dinner, we had a gratitude journals, and that was a common challenge from our children. But it's funny, you can start with like this, even the smallest thing, like even the smallest thing that you're grateful for. I had a really great cup of coffee, right? Or I slept well, or like even start with the smallest thing, because what you'll find is the more you practice it, the more your mind starts looking for the things to be grateful for. And you start looking for it actively without even consciously doing it. Your brain will automatically start looking for it. And then all of a sudden you have this list where you were struggling in the beginning when you started noticing like the tiny little things, again, even if it's like the smallest thing, like I liked my soda this morning, whatever it is, that builds and creates a momentum of itself.
Because our society's not set up to look at the positives. We're so worried about the negative. Everything's the negative. And so a lot of times it is, boy, I really dislike my job. It's a bad environment, and everything like that. And it's like, is there anything that you can look at? Because again, it's, where your energy goes,
Your,
whatever focus goes or
where your
whatever.
focus goes, your energy
But
goes.
it's also called confirmation bias. We look at a cognitive distortion, but we're focused on the negative, and then if that's all we stay focused on, that's all we're ever going to see, and that is not necessarily going to be a good thing. So that's where you could really start getting into those paths where you're just negative. You're bringing negative into every situation, every interaction. But if you're able to just kind of start to shift that, and again, patience, that takes a lot of time. That's not anything that all of a sudden be like, oh, the grass is green and the sun's shining. Great, I'm a positive person. Because we've still got 60, 80,000 thoughts running in our background with 90% on average being negative thoughts every day.
And honestly, just even noticing if you're having a negative thought is a win. So
right? That is a
because
win.
that is
It's
a win because
shifting
it
it.
takes the awareness to then
Yes.
pause to choose something different. So we often have clients that are like, "Oh, I'm so frustrated because I'm experiencing this now." It's like, "Wow, you're seeing it. Like you're seeing it yourself. That's something to celebrate because that's usually it's the blinder, right? Once you can see something, you can shift it if that's where you want to go."
Mhm.
Yeah, love that. And that's where AI comes in handy too. If I can't think of anything to be grateful for, I'm using AI to say, help me find things to be
Help
grateful
me.
for. I had a horrible day. It'll come up with something for you. You'll be able to pick a couple. And
Right.
to your point, sometimes once you start, it's like it grows. Even having conversations, like I met two incredible people today. I'm grateful for that, right? There's so many things that you can pause and be grateful for. We just are trained not to go the negative, to be the people pleasers, and so we can't find those things. Yeah.
It's biological. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's
Yeah.
there. Our mind's there to protect us. If we think there's danger or negativity, our mind is telling us, well, how do you want to handle the situation? Because mind's trying to protect you, even if you know it's not a good thing for you necessarily, but your mind wants to keep everything steady because that's safe and that's what it knows. And so that's why change is difficult. That's why looking for the positives is difficult, because you've got to get out of, sometimes it's a little bit of biology, frankly.
Right. But the more
Right.
you can do that, the more you're reinforcing to your brain
And rewiring.
you're rewiring your brain to a new way of looking at things, whether that's how you handle change, or that's how you look at the world from a more like gratitude perspective. You're training your brain to start looking at something else. And the more you do that, you're repeating that, it becomes more natural.
Love that. Yeah. Yeah, it does. And it gets easier. It's like
It
anything,
gets easier.
meditation. So many people will say, well, I can't meditate. My mind doesn't stop. It will. If you
Hmm.
continue, like anything, it's practice, right? So,
Right.
yeah. I'm going to ask you a question I ask everybody. What is the biggest thing you've learned throughout your journey that you want to share with our listeners, whether it's a valuable lesson, a transformative experience, something that had a profound impact on your professional growth?
Hmm.
I think for me, it's been when we went to counseling school together in 2014. I again, that slowed me down in a lot of things, but really seeing things, really, and I always felt myself as like an empathetic person. I could see things from other people's perspectives, but I guess for me, some of the transformation I see is, when it's working with leaders, is when we can get them into looking at, it's more than empathy, though. It's really in every situation getting them there. And that's kind of the transformation that happened to me. And that's what I probably love to see the most, is when I can get this transformation in clients and they can start to see the impact that they have just in their emotion, just how they show up every day. That's transformative for them, but it's this magnificent ripple effect that family's different, social relationships are different, leadership is different. And I think that's really why, I don't even know if I'm answering the question anymore, but that's kind of what happened for me when I really started kind of slowing down and doing different practices and just understanding. And then as I interacted with the world, that shifted. And then as I coach people, that shifted. But then as I work with leaders now, or as we work with leaders, we've got this magnificent ripple effect that when leaders are doing that, others are showing up differently, their personal lives are impacted. And I think that's been one of the more transformative things to me, is that I love counseling. I would love to do clinical counseling. Frankly, I don't have the stomach for it. I'm much more comfortable with high achievers. We've got the business experience too, so that's probably really where our sweet spot is. But getting them to, like, I want to help people. Melissa and I want to help people. There's no, but like, we know corporations, we know business, we know organizations, we know systems. So like, that's where we almost feel like we can make the most impact. And that's probably been the biggest enjoyment for me. It's kind of, I don't know if that's answering the question per se, but
I'd agree. I was going to say like, oh, now I'm going to go a different route.
I'm sorry.
That's good.
It's
Good.
better too.
No, that's good. That's good. That's good. I'm trying to think, because I would have two different ways I would look at it. I think for me, it's more around, I would agree. I love the ripple effect. I just feel like we all have a way that we can impact each other, both positively and negatively, and having that awareness of it. I think for me also learning that nothing's ever finite. So like as growing up, I always wanted to obviously do my best, but I had like a little bit of a perfectionist edge, and I was really hard on myself with things. So finding the ability to give myself grace and realize that nothing is ever finite. There is nothing I could ever do. There's nothing most people listening can ever do to really ever arrive that can conquer something for you.
Mm.
So kind of just checking yourself when you're having those down moments to be like, this is just another moment. And what can I learn from this moment? How can I take this hard moment and make it something that I can take with me going forward? Because then it takes that perfectionism and need to always have to get it right and always have to do things a certain way, and that pressure we put on ourselves, to give yourself grace. Because again, life is just a windy path, and while you might have blocks along the way, using those more challenging moments as opportunity to learn, to grow, to evolve is really, when I look back on my life, those challenging moments have been like the most rewarding moments, really. So I always try to keep that in perspective.
Yeah, I like that. So those triggers and emotions that appear, doing the actual parts work so that you can grow and learn from it is great, because we're all going to go through them. We're all going to have the ebbs and the flows, and here's where resilience comes in, how we handle those things, right? And
Right.
not, if you've beat yourself up, give yourself a little bit of grace, but understand why you did that. So to your point, so you can learn from it, so it doesn't just continue to happen, and it's rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat.
Right.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. Yeah. And I love that, kind of, like I said before, the 1 degree change, taking that 1 degree action, asking that one thing differently, doing something a little different, and seeing what happens, like testing it, just like you would in anything else in business. Yeah, I
Right.
love that.
And
Great.
reflect on it. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
reflect on it, whatever that means to you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, love that. Okay, so for the leader listening who like deeply resonates, because there was so much here with what you guys have shared, how can they begin working with you or learning from you? What does that look like?
Yeah, they can, certainly, come to our website. It's leadership-reinvented.com, or certainly LinkedIn as well. I mean, you should be able to find either Melissa Thallemer or Kevin Thallemer on there. But yeah, come through our website, or, or the office number too as well. I don't know if you want to do the phone number, but yeah, just come to the website. We do a free consultation, and it's just kind of a kickoff meeting with either of us. Sometimes both of us are there, or we work with individuals and companies, really of all sizes. Sometimes it's a small team, sometimes it's a bigger organization, but we very much enjoy working with individuals too as well. It's just like, yeah, I just need this. So
Mhm.
It's great. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Wealth of knowledge for people, and definitely something that they can take away from this call and start to make a difference and make that corner of their world a little bit nicer for them, especially in today's world. We need that right now. So
Right.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you very much for joining. And for my listeners, I'll make sure we include all the contact information, and of course that offer for that freebie, so that you can become more resilient. So thank you again, and have a beautiful day.
thank you.
Thank
Carol.
you.
Thanks for tuning in to today's Balanced Leader. If you want to go even deeper, then visit my website at carolinebaird.com, find some free resources, and look at all the different ways that I can support you to become your best self. Remember, change begins with just one small step. It's those tiny actions that start you on the path to achieving your dreams and finding balance. And as always, life is an experience. So take a moment to enjoy the journey and appreciate the progress you make along the way. Until next time, keep taking those small steps, savor the journey, and lead with courage and authenticity. This is Caroline, reminding you to stay bold, stay balanced, and keep moving confidently towards your dreams.